Over-the-counter drugs are part of the fabric of Americans maintaining their health, treating common ailments, including pain relief, allergies, and cold symptoms. I could use a little bit right now, at an affordable cost. They're available at every pharmacy and virtually every grocery store nationwide. Being readily available to Americans, OTCs save Americans a lot of money. The drugs generate an estimated $1.46 billion in annual sales from annual savings from fewer doctor's visits and prescription drug purchases. For decades, OTCs were required to go through a cumbersome review before going onto the market. This process, known as a drug monograph, typically took years to finalize. Many new OTC drugs were never fully approved. The review also made it more difficult for the FDA to update safety information on these drugs, sometimes delaying safety recommendations for several years. As a result of these challenges, Congress created the bipartisan over-the-counter Monograph Drug User Fee Program, a MUFA, in 2020 to streamline FDA review of OTC drugs, making these drugs more quickly available to Americans while still ensuring safety. A MUFA is set to expire at the end of this fiscal year. As Congress looks to reauthorize, we must see how we can further improve the program to better serve Americans. This is why today's hearing is so important. I highlight today is the first time Congress will be hearing directly from the FDA about how they've implemented reforms to the OTC drug review and their plans to make more low-cost drugs directly available to Americans. I appreciate Dr. Corrigan-Curray coming before the committee on behalf of the FDA. While the FDA has made progress in improving the OTC review pathways since 2020, there is more to do. FDA has failed to ease regulatory hurdles that allow prescription drugs to be sold OTC. These delays make it harder for consumers to directly access low-cost treatments. The agency continues to struggle with reviewing new sunscreens. Despite the well-documented public health value of using sunscreen, FDA has not approved a new sunscreen filter since 1999. In contrast, peer countries in Europe and Asia have many more high-quality sunscreen products available to consumers. The FDA needs to do a better job with sunscreen. I look forward to discussing how Congress can improve OMUFA and the OTC review process. And with that, I recognize Senator Kaine for his opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Cassidy, and thanks to my colleagues. Welcome, Dr. Corrigan-Curray. This is an important program because it's critically important for Americans to have access to safe and effective over-the-counter drugs. Recognizing the importance of regulating drugs that can be used without a prescription and the challenges facing the FDA, Congress passed the over-the-counter Monograph User Fee Program in 2020 to support the work of the FDA and expand access to medications that are safe and that are also easy to access and use. The magnitude of this is pretty big. U.S. consumers spent over $40 billion on over-the-counter drugs in 2024. 8 in 10 U.S. adults use over-the-counter products as a first response to a minor injury. Over-the-counter drugs can save Americans money, can save the healthcare system money. Research has found that $51.6 billion in drug cost savings occurred when lower-priced over-the-counter products are used instead of higher-priced prescription drugs. So that's really important both for the public treasury and for consumers. While over-the-counter drugs can generate savings, they can also be misused, leading to 178,000 hospitalizations each year due to adverse drug events. So it's important that we get the balance right. Older adults represent 1/3 of over-the-counter drug users and over 65% of these adverse drug events. So proper oversight is important. That's why we're here today. I was happy to support the initial passage of this user fee program. I'm glad the committee is back to marking up bipartisan legislation. Hope we'll do more of it. I do want to just conclude by just, putting on the table, we're obviously going to be grappling very soon with the reconciliation bill that deals pretty significantly with healthcare and with the FDA. Just in the last hour, the CBO released a report indicating that the House reconciliation bill would deprive 16 million Americans of health insurance. That's the House-passed bill. That tells us what the stakes are as we grapple with the reconciliation bill. And obviously, I know my colleagues and I are going to be fighting very hard to avoid that. But let's just focus on the FDA. Since the administration took office, 20,000 employees at the Department of Health and Human Services have been dismissed, and this includes over 3,500 FDA staff currently on administrative leave. Many other staff have been forced out or are leaving because of the chaos at the agency, including the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, which we are here to talk about today. I asked Senator Kennedy, who was before us, about the effect of some of these cuts, in particular some detailed questions about how many of these folks laid off were veterans. I await an answer and haven't received it yet. The mission of the FDA to ensure the safety and effectiveness of thousands of drugs and medical products, including in this program that we're focused on today, is so important. And the way to overhaul the agency is not to indiscriminately fire thousands of experts. So I hope we get some answers about how the decisions were made on these layoffs and what impact they could have on the ability of the FDA to successfully implement the program that we are here to discuss today. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. We're joined today by Dr. Jacqueline Corrigan-Curray, the Acting Director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, or CDER, at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. In her role as Acting CDER Director, Dr. Corrigan-Curray is responsible for ensuring that safe, effective, and high-quality drugs are available to the public. She brings a long career in medical research, including numerous positions at FDA as well as the NIH. Dr. Corrigan-Curray holds degrees from Harvard Law School, the University of Maryland School of Medicine, and Harvard University. I look forward to hearing from her today, and thank you for joining us. Is your microphone on?
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Good morning, Chair Cassidy, Ranking Member Kane, and members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I want to talk about something that benefits nearly every American household, over-the-counter medications. These are the products that millions rely on every day: an antiseptic when your child has a scrape, antihistamines when the pollen counts rise.
Will you pull that microphone closer to you, please?
Yes, and an antacid after a heavy meal. They are trusted, essential, and they must be safe, effective, and up to date. And that's where the OTC Monograph User Program, or MUFA, comes in. Prior to 2020, our ability to regulate OTC drugs hadn't been modernized in decades. It was slow, outdated, and inflexible. Reform was overdue. When Congress passed the OTC Monograph reform as part of the CARES Act, it was a bipartisan success that brought real change. Critically, the user fees that Congress authorized, OMUFA, are what facilitated and supported OTC Monograph reform and has set the program for success. Now, with congressional support and timely reauthorization, we have the opportunity to realize the full potential of the OTC Monograph reform, ensuring a nimble regulatory process, fostering innovation to better serve patients and consumers, and enhancing transparency and accountability from the FDA and industry. So what have we accomplished so far? In just 5 years, OMUFA has helped FDA modernize the OTC drug review process, transforming it from a paper-heavy rulemaking system to a responsive electronic one. We've delivered 5 guidance documents providing clarity to manufacturers and enhancing public health protections. We've posted 33 final orders and 5 proposed administrative orders, providing transparency for manufacturers on what is expected to market a particular OTC drug. And I want to highlight our most recent proposed order because we believe it will foster some exciting innovation for children and families. If finalized, this order would let companies create new, easier to take forms of OTC medications like chewable tablets, tablets that melt in your mouth in thin films. And these would be for certain medications that currently only come as tablets or capsules and could help people who have trouble swallowing them. OMUFA has also helped hire 85 dedicated staff members, scientists, safety reviewers, and regulatory experts who help ensure the products on our shelves are safe and effective. And importantly, it has opened the door to more innovative products like a new sunscreen ingredient through the administrative order process. If Congress does not authorize OMUFA this year, the momentum would come to a grinding halt. The impact would be immediate and damaging. Engagement on development programs and activities to oversee the safety and quality of OTC Monograph products would slow or stop, as dozens of FDA staff with clinical quality and safety expertise would lose their positions. Critical progress on proposed and final orders from the FDA's Monograph forecast would be shelved, and these include essential updates on labeling, drug facts, and ingredients, including for products intended for pregnant women and children. and no new agreements from the recent commitment letter could be implemented, including important steps like improving meeting management with sponsors and more quickly assessing the quality of facilities as companies bring new products to the U.S. And perhaps most concerning, we risk sliding backwards, losing the transparency, predictability, and innovation that AMUFA was designed to create. Without reauthorization, the system that was finally fixed begins to break again. The recently negotiated agreement for the next 5 years of AMUFA includes smart, achievable goals, increasing opportunities for industry and FDA to interact to foster innovation, improving the transparency of the user fee program, investing in product quality and safety, and continuing to publish the annual guidance forecasts that give industry and public health stakeholders a clear roadmap for the future. These aren't just words, they're a commitment to the public, a commitment to keep this progress going. Every delay in regulation or review affects real people. Without AMUFA, innovations are stalled, safety improvements are delayed, and consumers may unknowingly continue to use products that haven't been adequately reviewed under modern science. This isn't about red tape, it's about real lives, real trust, and the medications that Americans buy off the shelf every day. In closing, Congress made a smart investment in 2020 when it created AMUFA. That investment is paying off, but we can't stop now. Reauthorizing AMUFA means continued modernization, supporting innovation, and most importantly, keeping American families safe. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Doctor. I have a question here, but it kind of goes against the flavor of your testimony. And your testimony was very positive about the positive things that AMUFA has done. But my question is, it seems like the RX to OTC switch, which is from prescription to non-prescription, that the FDA has struggled to make that happen. So is that a misperception on my part, or is there has this been more successful than I have understood?
Thank you for that question. In the past few years, we have brought certain prescription drugs to over-the-counter, and that would include the naloxone that became over-the-counter and was very critical, I believe, in helping us address the opioid crisis. We have brought the first contraceptive over-the-counter as well, and we have brought some of the nasal allergy sprays over-the-counter. And as you also may be aware, we have a rule that should be finalized, and that would be to bring additional medications over the counter with a condition of use. So to have a new way of bringing medications over the counter, and we hope that that would greatly expand.
I'd explain the condition of use.
Yes, so under this rule, if we determined that you could not bring a drug over the counter with just the drug facts label, because with that label alone, a person could not appropriately self-select for that drug and use it, then a company could propose an additional condition. It might be a mobile app or something with some questions, and then if we can show that with use of that additional condition or that those questions before they access the product, they can access it safely, that would open the door to products that we currently do not have over the counter.
Now, can you give an example of that, or is it?
They're still in development. There are things in development, but we could think potentially about drugs might be for chronic conditions where we could select a population for which that drug was safe to take over the counter.
Now, let me go back to, you listed some that have become over the counter, but you listed like 5 or 6. And there's a heck of a lot of drugs out there that could be over the counter. And so is it that you're just giving me a sample, you're giving me a sample, for example, 5 or 6 drugs I'm going to mention, or is it, no, that's the universe of those that have been approved? Because, let me ask you that.
Thank you. You know, in the recent time frame, those were the ones I highlighted. You know, we certainly work hard to look for opportunities to bring drugs over the counter that patients can safely self-select and use. And then, as I said, I think our
Now, let me understand the process. Don't mean to interrupt, but I have limited time.
Sorry.
Does the drug company have to apply, or can you, for example, Benadryl, I think, used to be like a prescription drug. And Claritin used to be a prescription drug.
Right.
So, but really, you could have looked at those and said, this doesn't have to be a prescription drug. I mean, this could be over the counter. So does the drug company have to apply, or can the agency say, this drug can safely be given OTC?
Thank you for that question. The application does need to come in. However, in the case of naloxone, if I recall, we put out an FR notice saying that we were open to working to bring naloxone over the counter. So I think we have opportunities to signal where we think there might be opportunity. We also, we do speak to companies, and we could, suggest that we might be open to a development program. It does require a development program to show that the.
And what do you mean by development program?
Yes, so a company would need to show that consumers can self-select appropriately and use it with the information that's on the drug facts label.
Now, let's go back to something like Tagamet, which again, at one point was a prescription drug, or Prilosec, which at one point was a prescription drug. You could have looked at that initial information, I'm saying you rhetorically could have looked at that and said, this is a pretty safe drug. And people could take it for heartburn. And so I guess I'm asking, since that would save lots of money for patients,
Right.
if they could buy those drugs OTC as opposed to having to see a physician, is there something Congress can do to expedite that? Or do you have all the tools that you need to actually generate a kind of more aggressive approach to the RX to OTC method?
Thank you. So in the case of that drug, we certainly would say first, yes. Does it look like it has a safety profile that we have enough time, we have enough experience? But then we do have to have the information saying that the consumers can self-select. We're always happy if you have ideas to work with you on those.
Senator Kane.
I'm such an OMUFA nerd that I'm going to stay for the whole hearing, so I'm going to yield to Senator Kim and take my questions later.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming on out. I wanted to ask you, it was raised in the opening remarks about some of the reduction in force. So I guess I just wanted to ask you, are you able to tell us if any of the staff in the Office of Non-Prescription Drugs were terminated under the reduction in force efforts?
Yes, thank you for that question. Unfortunately, and consistent with our policy, when there's something that's a subject of litigation, we don't comment on the specifics. And as you know, there is a preliminary injunction around the reduction in force, so I can't go into any details at this point.
When you're able to provide answers, I'd like to know, how many staff have been let go or resigned from the Office of Non-Prescription Drugs, and how many of those were funded by user fees. Also want to talk about the commitments that the FDA made with the OTC industry as part of the OMUFA commitment letter, specifically the agreement that FDA would hire 11 new full-time employees over the length of the reauthorization. I understand that there's currently a hiring freeze at the FDA. First, is that the case? And second, if so, will the FDA be able to stand by this commitment of hiring 11 additional full-time staff?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes, there is a hiring freeze, but I know, as Dr. McCary has indicated, he is working to allow us to hire the reviewers that we need for all aspects, and so I am confident that he will be working with us to give us the resources we need to be successful under OMUFA 2.
Okay. I want to just kind of hone in on a particular example to try to get a sense of how OMUFA is moving forward and how it's performing. So, for instance, sunscreen. This is something where we understand that the United States has continued to lag behind other countries in terms of UV filters that are approved for use in sunscreens, and the FDA has not approved a new filter, a UV filter, since 1999. Is that correct?
That is correct, although we do have a new OTC Monograph order under review for a new sunscreen ingredient.
Well, I guess I'd just like to hear a little bit more from you because, despite Congress creating this new pathway and then several years overhauling the entire OTC Monograph order process, so, we still have no new sunscreen ingredients formally approved. You said there's something in the works?
Yes.
But I guess I just want to kind of ask you, how do we try to address this? How do we try to make sure that we're moving forward and addressing these main challenges of approving new ingredients?
Yes. So I'd like to explain a little bit about the sunscreen market. Sunscreens for us they're considered drugs because they're used to protect against the damages of the sun and skin cancer. And any drug that we approve that's topical but that has systemic absorption, we need to make sure that the systemic absorption has no untoward effects. And those could include things like disrupting the endocrine system or even abnormal growth of cells or tumors. And we do know that certain ingredients in the literature have been highlighted as potential endocrine disruption. So to do that, we would ask a company to do those tests just like for any other drug that we approve. And we've laid out the data that we think would be necessary for us to do an assessment, and we're waiting for, more companies to come to us with that data, and then we'd be happy to review it and work on that. I'd also like to note that I know that there are additional sunscreens in different countries. Not all of them are treated as a drug, but I also like to say that, there's no data that those are more effective or that we don't have effective sunscreens on the market here in the United States.
Yeah. I want to just switch gears a little bit, just sort of another angle. I'm a father of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old. A lot of parents in the bleary, early mornings of a sick child, try to wander off, try to figure out what we can do for our kids. I understand that the FDA has stated its intention to develop pediatric weight-based dosing for acetaminophen during the next user fee authorization. I guess I want to know, for myself, if I'm giving my kids the right dosage here. So could you explain to the committee what staff resources are needed to make that change happen? How do we ensure that we're able to move that forward promptly?
Yes, thank you. We will be asking for new staff in AMUFA 2 to continue to put out our orders and guidances, but this is a priority for us. We do know that there have been improvements in the way the acetaminophen concentrations on the shelf, but we need to address this weight-based, and we will put that as a priority. It's on our agenda.
Well, I just raised this as another example of just the importance that we have staff, that we have the experts there able to process this. And when we see so much slashing of employees and staff, I worry that these types of direct benefits to people will be casted aside. And with that, I'll yield back.
Senator Marshall.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our guest today. Let's talk about measuring success. My question is, how do you measure success? I assume that from a safety standpoint, every month you're reviewing things that, did we get anything wrong and how come? But beyond that, how do you measure success from the standpoint of the ones that are coming into the system? Is there a set amount of time you'd like to have them out by? What percentage of those made it through the process in that amount of time? How do you measure success?
Thank you. I think, in AMUFA 1, we've measured success in that we've stood up the program. We've provided those foundational guidances. We've created an electronic, efficient way for companies to communicate with us. And then we have the first new proposed order in that we're reviewing. We're also making all of our commitments on meetings. So we are meeting with companies. And so our success will be to continue to move those development programs.
So all those you're trying to improve success,
Yes.
but I don't hear you measuring success. In the standpoint of, you run a hospital, you run a bank,
Right.
every month you look to these key metrics to say, are we hitting these measures?
Yes, for us, we'll be putting out our agenda, and that's the planned 3-year agenda, and that will tell you the successes of getting these orders out. So, for example, the new order that we just put out, which will allow for changes in the dosage forms, and we think that's very innovative and will help.
So you don't have a
access.
monthly dashboard of metrics that you're looking at to see if we're meeting them?
We are tracking all of the things that we're doing in terms of proposed orders, that we're meeting our timelines on reviews, and when there is
Can you share your dashboard with us?
I don't know if it's an electronic dashboard, but, we are tracking what we're doing in our commitments.
Okay, I would love to see how you're measuring success.
Sure.
If it's not a
could get
dashboard,
back
I
to
would
you.
encourage you to get one. Let's talk about inactive ingredients. As you know, the OTC monographs only list active ingredients. A lot of MAHA moms out there concerned about inactive ingredients, artificial flavors, sweeteners, et cetera. What is going on in the world of over-the-counters as far as identifying those inactive ingredients, and is there an effort to get the ones that are not safe out of these over-the-counters?
Thank you for that question. We certainly, anytime we identify that there's an issue with an inactive ingredient, we would review it and we would look to make changes in that inactive ingredient. We do have ways and guidances. We just did one on color additives to allow firms to a pathway if they want to change their inactive ingredients or their color additives. And we can get back to you with more information on
Is
that.
there a way, wouldn't it be pretty simple for your monographs to include the inactive ingredients?
I think I might have to get back to you on that question about, could we just do that?
Okay.
If you don't mind, thank you.
All right, let's talk about, studies. More and more, it would seem that AI can replace animal studies, and probably even more accurate. So often you read, well, what happened in monkeys and dogs has nothing at all to do with the biology of human beings. Is there any effort in your department to convert over to AI and doing less animal studies?
Thank you. We're engaged on the new initiative to reduce animal studies in the monoclonal antibodies, and we have been working on looking for alternatives to animal studies. We no longer use animal studies for eye irritation or skin irritation, and we certainly will, are looking at both AI as we're looking at these non-animal approaches. There are still challenges in coming out with validated studies when you're looking at you're looking for an effect that would affect multi-organ systems. That doesn't mean that we won't get there, and we'll continue to work on that.
Okay. Again, if there's a way that you could measure that and show us, we were doing so many animal studies 5 years ago, this is how many we did last year, this is how many we're doing this year, prove to me that you're making progress in that. That would be very helpful.
We can get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman. I yield back.
Senator Kane.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairs. Thank you, Doctor, for being with us and for your service and hard work over there. And I know there are hard times. Several of us are working on a bill we call Skinny Labels, Big Savings, the Skinny Labels, Big Savings Act. Senators Collins and Cotton and Welch and I, trying to address the endless procession of lawsuits against generic drug manufacturers who, obtain the skinny label, FDA approvals. I think if we can encourage more generic drugs to come to market through this legislation, we're going to lower costs widely for the American consumers. So, Dr. Corrigan-Curry, are you willing to commit to work with us to advance this legislation so that we can lower drug costs? And as the acting director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, what else are you working on to try and create more competition, more generic competition?
Thank you for that question. Absolutely, we support additional generic competition. We know that generics make up 90% of the prescriptions in the United States. We think the skinny labeling, we're happy to work with you on that legislation. Other things that we are doing, we are continuing to put out our guidances, our product-specific guidances, which are a roadmap for developers. In addition, it's very important as we see more opportunities in complex generics that we work with industry and academia to develop the science to allow those to come forward. So we have a very robust regulatory science program, and in fact, our science meeting on generics is ongoing today. And then we put guidance. We also seek to meet all of our goals, and I would just note, I believe in 2024, we approved about 59 first generics. So those are generics, drugs for which there was no generic competition before we approved them.
That's great. Appreciate that. And I'll come back also to AI, because you're touching on AI there as well. This week, you launched ELSA, this new AI tool.
Yes.
And Commissioner McCary stated that ELSA was designed to expedite, to review processes at the agency with the goal of making them shorter and yet more successful, better. He stated, and I quote, "All information stays within the agency, and the AI models are not being trained on data submitted by the industry." And so can you share with us a little bit, Dr. Corrigan-Curry, some of the additional details about how exactly the FDA is going to ensure that the data within ELSA remains secure? I mean, I view ELSA as a tool, but like any tool, we've got to make sure we handle it safely.
Yes, thank you. We are very excited about the initiative that Dr. McCary is leading on AI because we do see there's utility to this tool in our work, and we are not training it on the data. What we are doing is AI, this type of AI could be very helpful when we've got a number of documents and we want to summarize them, and we have to summarize them for one of our reviews. We still have to check it. We have to make sure it's right. But, you know, the confidentiality and privacy of data within the FDA is one of our top priorities. I mean, we're trusted to keep that, and we will continue to work on that, even as we incorporate new tools into our review processes.
All right, well, I appreciate that, and I support that 100%. Let's talk a little bit about transparency at the FDA. Secretary Kennedy, Commissioner McCary both sat in your seat and committed during their confirmation that transparency would be a priority for them and for the entire agency. And yet, FDA appears to have attempted to gut the team that responds to the Freedom of Information requests. In other words, those requests for the transparency, everyone disappeared, everyone's let go or encouraged to retire. Also, the FDA bypassed the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, in the recent COVID vaccine guidance, taking one of the few forums we have for clear and open debate on vaccines, and they kind of skip right over it. So does any of this promote transparency? You know, how do we reconcile the public commitments to transparency with some of these opaque actions? At least they appear to me and to many of us. And how can we course correct and make sure that Americans feel confident that they're getting transparency, they're seeing what is coming, and that they can believe in these actions?
Thank you for that. At CEDAR, we're very committed to being transparent. We held an advisory committee, I believe, about a month ago on our opioid PMRs. We continue to communicate, and we will continue to keep that transparency and communication open with the public. And in AMUFA, we have several initiatives that we'll be doing in terms of webinars, posting not only the firms that didn't pay, but the firms that did pay, to provide transparency around that, transparency around exclusivity. So we will continue to do that.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Chairs. I yield back.
Senator Tuberville.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor, for being here. We know Secretary Kennedy's all into modernization while we're waiting for these user fees to be reauthorized. What are we doing in the meantime of getting ready for, you know, dealing with the atmosphere that we're in today? What are we doing?
Thank you. Are you asking me how we're preparing for the user
Yes.
fee negotiations?
Right.
Yes, thank you. So as we do every cycle for the user fees, obviously for AMUFA, we're here to talk about the reauthorization. For the other user fees, we do have internal processes that we undertake to think about the next agreements and what we would like to propose. And of course, those would be discussed with Dr. McCary. I believe the notices of our public meetings for July are already out, and so we'll have those public meetings and engage the public on those user fees.
Thank you. We've already talked a little bit about dyes, some things, sweeteners that go into a lot of our over-the-counter drugs. You go into these places and the drugstores look like a candy store, and they're enticed to be marketed in certain ways because of the color. Do we have, what kind of priorities do we have on labeling of, number one, what goes into the, you know, some of the over-counter drugs, where they're made? I've looked at a lot of bottles and things inside our stores, and you can't find out whether they're made in Korea, whether they're made in China, or whether they're made in the United States. Shouldn't that be a priority?
Thank you for that question. One thing when we think about where a drug is made, we are committed to making sure that wherever the drug is made, and if it's being marketed, is safe. So we apply the same standards, whether it's made domestically or it's made internationally. We certainly are very supportive. I know the administration is looking to onshore pharmaceutical manufacturing, and that would be for prescriptions or for OTC, and we're very supportive of that, and we'll work with them in terms of our regulatory frameworks to help make that happen. But right now, we don't have a labeling on the drug for where it's made. We're happy to work with you if that's a priority.
Well, I think in the future, with the problems we're having worldwide, I think it'd probably be a good suggestion that people, when they go in, they find out where it's made. We found out during COVID, we don't make much anymore. Most of it comes from China. And we really don't know what's in it. You know, we're finding out now a lot of metals and things are in a lot of the drugs and even the foods that we have. Another question I had about sunscreen. Most of us use sunscreen. I don't know how it's evaluated, but over the years, last 50 years, melanoma and skin cancers have almost quadrupled. And I don't know whether people don't use it or it's not working, or we get some kind of skin cancer from ingredients that are in sunscreens, because all of us use it at some point. Doesn't really feel safe every time I put it on, but I put it on because sometimes you know, you look at the worst case scenario. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you for that. First of all, we're very aware that, skin cancer risk is a very serious and problem. And the sunscreens we have, the testing does say they are effective if used properly, and some of our tests, when we're testing for systemic absorption, is how you use them. We do have 2 sunscreens that are mineral sunscreens that are grass, they're not absorbed. For those that absorbed, we've asked for additional tests just to assure their safety, that systemic absorption has no untoward effects.
Are we looking into the ingredients that are so-called cancer causers? I would hope we would be.
Yes.
We hear it and read it all the time.
Sorry to interrupt. Yes, and part of the testing that we want to do whenever a drug is absorbed and it reaches systemic levels is a test for tumor formation.
Yeah. Thank you. I yield back.
Senator Kane.
Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Trump administration has fired 3,500 federal employees at the Food and Drug Administration out of 20,000, and 800 out of the 7,500 people at your Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. And despite assurances from Commissioner McCary that slowdowns would not happen, I have heard from researchers and companies that the drug review process has slowed down to a crawl, and many have been stuck in limbo for months waiting on reviews and approvals to be completed. Up in Massachusetts, in a survey released by MassBio in May, 67% of biopharma firms surveyed were highly concerned that workforce reductions will delay drug approvals, and at least 50% were already feeling the impacts from the FDA layoffs. So this is not a good situation for all these biotechs up in my state and across the country. The Trump administration's actions have guaranteed that every stage of developing life-saving drugs, from research to clinical trials to approvals, is slowed down or stopped. We are witnessing in real time a giveaway of our global leadership in drug research, in development, in biomedical innovation, and firing FDA officials responsible for drug approvals and evaluation is part of the problem. So my question is, obviously there have been many essential employees who have left as part of this reduction in workforce, and the goal has to be to increase, obviously, the timeliness of the review processes. So what is your plan, Doctor, to replace the institutional knowledge that was lost from longtime FDA employees being fired or resigning?
Thank you for that question. I know we can't really discuss details around the RIF about the litigation, but our reviewers are in place.
Can you move over the microphone a little bit, please?
Sorry, our reviewers are in place, and I would say that we are meeting our timelines. I know that occasionally
Timelines to do what?
the timelines for approval and for our approval of our drugs. We do occasionally miss timelines. If you look at our
I have 50% of my companies who are already saying they're feeling the impacts of the FDA layoff, so they're already feeling it.
we certainly will look into that. I would note that, we are approving drugs and making our timelines. There are certain times, all of our agreements, we have 90%, not 100%, because sometimes there are issues that come up that are complex and scientific issues that we'd rather take a little bit more time if we need to make sure we get them right. But we are also going to work with Dr. McCary. We have turnover in our review staff on a routine basis every year, and Dr.
No, I
McCary.
appreciate that, but you're down 800, so, which is a lot in, you know, in the real time that these companies have to get some answers. So what was your role in the firing of the 800 employees at the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research?
Again, I apologize, but because of the ongoing litigation, I can't comment a lot about the RIF and the employees and the reduction in force.
Was Doge involved in the firings at the FDA?
Again, because of the ongoing litigation, I'm not able to comment on that.
Yeah, in a lawsuit that was filed by federal workers yesterday, a
Yes.
federal worker stated that on March 31st, 2025, just 2 months ago, a group of Doge employees visited the FDA's office. And that day, someone dressed in a business attire yelled, "This is Doge, and this is your last supper," at an FDA employee. So, Doctor, can you walk me through what happens when someone at the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research is fired in terms of who signs off on the termination paperwork and how the notification is sent to employees?
Again, you know, because the RIF is involved in litigation, I can't comment further on the process, and I'm not aware of that incident.
Yeah, well, obviously, you're in a difficult position, which I appreciate. I appreciate that. But whether it's McCary or Kennedy or Doge who are calling the shots, it's obviously going to ripple down into very negative consequences for the biopharma industry, but for people across our country and nation who are waiting for these drugs to be available to help their families. So it's really, it's a crisis, and combined with all of the cuts in NIH research funding, we might as well gift wrap the biotech sector as a gift to the Chinese government, because this is just an absolute tragedy in real time that is unfolding in our nation, and it's just completely unnecessary. So I thank you so much.
Senator Moody. Husted, I'm sorry, Senator Husted.
Thank you. Appreciate you joining us today. The realm of my question is really around the idea that healthcare costs are the most inflationary costs in the 21st century in the American economy, and that time is money. The faster we can do things, we can lower costs, improve access to consumers. And whether it's moving from prescription to over-the-counter, whether it's approval of generics, whether it is decreasing the time development and approval process, parallel approval tracks, all of those things. Give me your thoughts on how we can go faster, maintain quality, but also in everything that FDA touches to reduce the cost of delivery ultimately within the economy to our consumers, our patients.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think there's a number of different things we do. For example, on the innovative drug side, when we approve a new molecular entity, a new drug, a novel drug that has an unmet need, it often undergoes priority review. So we speed up that review. And in 2024, we approved 50 new drugs. 52% were for rare diseases. And of those, 56% we did priority review, so shaving off the time. We also realized that our role in this is really to increase competition. So as I spoke, our generic program is very robust, and we seek to get generic drugs on the market by working to provide clarity on the pathway, by working on regulatory science that can make a difference. And then the other younger program is a biosimilar, but we're seeing that accelerate with the number of approvals we have. And again, we've been working on, thinking about this, the biosimilar to interchangeable, that in most cases you don't need any additional study. We're also have convened a meeting with the public and our international regulators to think more on how we can rely on analytic than clinical studies, because we know those take the longest and are the most expensive. So those are some of the areas that we're working on.
And I know that the issue of AI has been discussed in terms of process refinement, but it also that quantum computing and other tools are being used in the healthcare sector to speed development. Do you have any comments or thoughts on that and how that can enhance the time involved?
Yes, we have. Yes, thank you. We do have a program called Model-Informed Development, in which we do modeling and we use machine learning to look at how we can accelerate a review program, maybe looking at different doses through modeling. Our biostatisticians also do a lot of modeling if they're doing, complex statistical modeling to see how we can work on a development program. So we're very committed to using AI. Some of our research, I believe, in the generic industry is also, in generic science program, also focuses on some AI approaches. We can give you more information if you like.
That'd be great. And again, I didn't hear you really touch on generic approval, generics approval of generics and time frame around that. Is there any thoughts on that?
Again, we do have 2 different tiers in the generic. So if it's a first generic or there's not a lot of competition, again, we do speed up those timelines to really try and meet the need. We've been meeting the timelines that we've agreed with industry, and we will be looking for efficiencies. I think the AI, in terms of summarizing and some of the paper and administrative tasks that are involved, we'll try and work on that.
So I'm going to give you an opportunity to give us some advice. What laws exist that are inhibiting you from going faster, and what should we change?
Well, in the generic industry, I think one thing would be to make the ingredients transparent so that they wouldn't have to ask us the ingredient and the amount. That's what we call the Q1, Q2. I think we've put forth legislation because we often have to go back and forth on that topic. So that would be very helpful. I think, what was spoken about with the skinny labeling is very helpful to give certainty in that area and bring generics. And I think in the biosimilar area, we have talked about not having this biosimilar interchangeable classification and have everything that's a biosimilar be interchangeable. I think that would also be quite helpful.
Great, thank you.
We did have a drug bill last December before you came in, John, that addressed the Q1, Q2, and so we do hope to get that back up.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kane.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Senator Kane and Chairman Cassidy. And Senator Houston, Senator Paul and I have the Q1, Q2 bill that the witness was just talking about, and we'd love it if you take a look at it too. Dr. Karkin-Curie, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your work at the FDA from one administration to the next. It's really important work. Before 2015, FDA used a labeling system that made it hard for pregnant women to understand the health risks of different medications. For example, the old system labeled 2 very different kinds of medications under a single category: medications where animal studies suggested risks for pregnant women, and medications where the risks for pregnant women hadn't been studied at all. The FDA replaced this system back in 2015, but as of earlier this year, there were still several drugs on the market using the old system, including common medications like antibiotics. Senator Budd and I wrote to the FDA in January urging the agency to address this issue. Doctor, has the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research brought all prescription drug manufacturers into compliance with pregnancy labeling standards?
Yes, thank you. We now have submissions from all of the drugs that were outstanding to put into the PLLR labeling.
Thank you. That is really good progress, and I appreciate it very much. Now, I understand that over-the-counter drugs sometimes have pregnancy warnings on the label, but the FDA does not have a specific standard for pregnancy safety labeling for over-the-counter drugs. Is the FDA working to improve the labeling process for over-the-counter drugs as well?
I know we do have, in our proposed order, we're going to be looking at some labeling for pregnancy. I believe it's around the NSAIDs, but we can take that under advisement.
I think that would be a really important thing to look at, and I'd look forward to working with you on that. At Commissioner McCary's confirmation hearing, he and I discussed lowering drug prices by increasing generic drug competition, something we were just talking about. Pharmaceutical companies currently use loopholes in the patent system to build so-called patent walls around their products. The patent walls can block low-cost generic versions of medications for decades. So what steps is the FDA taking? You talked about this a little bit with Senator Houston. What steps is the FDA taking to improve its coordination with patent regulators in the United States to facilitate more access to low-cost generics?
Thank you. We have started meeting with the Patent and Trade Office and sharing our expertise with them, as well as we are, cooperating. As you know, the FTC has sent some letters about certain products in the Orange Book. We're not the experts in this, but we certainly will work with the other agencies on these issues.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I have a bipartisan bill that would improve access to generic drugs by closing a loophole through which drug makers currently exploit a lack of coordination between the FDA and the Patent Office. The bill would allow patients to access lower-cost medication sooner and would save taxpayers $100 million over a decade. So I am hopeful that the chair and my colleagues on this committee will work with me to advance the legislation. Families across the country rely on over-the-counter medications to stay healthy, especially during bad cold and flu seasons like the one we just had. Unfortunately, in recent years, we've seen vulnerabilities in our supply of common medications, such as children's cold and flu medications. In the winter of 2023, many families, including my own, could not find children's Tylenol or Motrin on the shelf due to extreme increased demand and strain on the supply chain. How can Congress help the FDA identify and address vulnerabilities in our over-the-counter drug supply chains so we can ultimately stop these shortages from happening?
Yes, thank you. And that was a very unfortunate time where we had a very rapid increase in demand for those medications, and our shortage staff have really worked very hard to resolve it like they do with other shortages. I think one thing that we do have reporting, and you gave us this authority, when there's an interruption in supply, for example, for manufacturing or a lack of API, but we don't have the same required reporting for increased demand. So in that case, whether if we can get an earlier signal that increased demand could lead to a shortage, that's when we can take action. Each year, last year in '24, there were 11 new shortages. That's unfortunate. We'd like that to be 0. But we prevented over 250 shortages, and it's that early action that allows us to start doing things quickly in terms of, getting new suppliers, getting new API. So demand would be great.
Yeah, no, that would be something I'd be really interested in working on. There's nothing like watching a child's temperature go up and up and up and not have the medication you need to not only get that child comfortable, but prevent further risks and complications. So thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your service. We are grateful to you. I am from the Sunshine State. I'm Ashley Moody. I'm the newest senator in the Sunshine State. Sunscreens are really important to our almost 24 million citizens. And this is a topic that I want to get into, and I know that speed and delay has been addressed with you. That is an issue across federal agencies. What I'm really loving about this new administration are they are focusing on efficiency and getting back to the mission of these agencies. And I'm hopeful that we're going to see that on some of these issues. I know in your testimony you talked about sunscreen and how we can move forward. I think we're basing trying to get new products on the market that may be more effective, and it's adding some ingredients. And do you expect that to be addressed quickly? Because I cannot tell you how important it is to all the golfers and all the beachgoers and all the Florida folks and all the tourists. By the way, we broke another record in tourism in Florida this year. To have that looked at, we want people to be safe, obviously, but is that going to be expeditiously approved?
Yes, so we're very excited to be reviewing the first new sunscreen, and we will review that on time. We'll get the order out and get the public comment, and we'll meet our goals on that. Hopefully, it will be
And
a
what is that,
successful.
what is that timeline? What is your goal?
So when something, I'd have to look at exactly when it was submitted. Our timeline for a new ingredient is 17 months, which seems long, but it's quite different than our other UFAs. So because it has a public comment period, because the public is so involved in this process. And so we have a 45-day comment period, and then we get those comments. And, often the public wants to provide us a lot of comment. We have to make sure that we take that comment into effect when we then move forward with the final order. And I think what's different in the AMUFA and why the timelines look a little bit longer is when we're in the PDUFA or GDUFA, it's one company, one drug. When we're in the OTC monograph, it's, one monograph, but it could be many and thousands of drugs. So we have to make sure that we really get that right when we issue that final order. And again, we are committed to working with companies. They get us that data, as you said, so we make sure any of those ingredients that were absorbed are safe. We're also looking at alternative test methods to see if they're validated and we can use them.
I think that's one of the key things and one of the key issues you've been addressing today, I think, is speed. We want to make sure we're protecting the health, safety, and welfare of Americans, obviously, but we need to also make sure bureaucracy is not weighing down what is meant to be a protection mechanism. It would be my preference as not just a United States Senator, but as an American, that government stay out of our business as much as possible. In fact, I think that if that can be achieved, that is what promotes a thriving, successful, populous country, only when it's necessary to protect rights or safety of our citizens. And even there, at the bare minimum, as Attorney General in Florida, I once had to fight the Biden administration because they wanted to put masks on 2-year-olds while they were outside. I mean, it made absolutely no sense. They wanted to involve themselves in every facet of American life. And I, for one, believe that the first thing that should cross a bureaucrat's mind when they are going to act is, do we really need to be involving ourselves in this issue or in Americans' lives? The majority of the time, it should be no. But when they do, it should be minimized, and we should deliver and act as efficiently as possible. And one of the things that I'm happy about is how quickly we were able to get naloxone to the market. I know that you have been happy about that.
Yes.
You used both the Monograph drug user fee program and other things to make sure that that was done. I believe that that is significantly contributing to the decrease in deaths as it relates to the opioid crisis. In fact, I think nationally we saw over a 12-month period a 27% decline nationwide. In Florida, we exceeded that number, a 30% decline, but it was not just about interdiction efforts or getting people to seek treatment. It was also about access to naloxone and people being able to get that over the counter. So thank you for that. Was there anything that you can learn from working with the drug sponsor, getting information quickly, getting that through the process that we can apply to how we're moving forward to making sure we're streamlining this program? Because the deadline to reauthorize it is coming up quickly, I know. If we are going to have a program that is supposed to push things forward quicker, if government's going to involve itself in the lives of Americans and to protect them, how do we do that quicker? Is there something you learned from that and the FDA approval of the naloxone drug to over-the-counter that we can apply to this program?
Yes, thank you. And just to clarify, the OTC naloxone was not under the Monograph program because they're not monographs, but yes. One of the things that we're introducing in AMUFA too is we need to make sure when we're working with a company and they're meeting with us that we're maximizing that time and getting them on the right path. So one of the things that we will do, we'll expand those meetings if it's complex. We'll make sure that we give them advice on their protocol synopsis if they need it. And if we give them advice and they're still not sure what to do, they have the opportunity to ask us to clarify that advice. So I think, making sure that when we interact, it's very clear to the company what our expectations are. And I 100% agree with you. We want to streamline. We want to take a risk-benefit approach to every action that we do and to try and get products to the market that are, to meet an unmet need as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Senator Kane.
Senator Alsobrooks.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Dr. Corrigan-Curray, and thank you so much for being here today. And I also want to just thank you for your service. It is unfortunate because I know you've been thrust in the position today to answer for many of the very reckless decisions of political leadership at the Federal Drug Administration. But the reality is that this administration really has been unable to answer basic questions about their so-called reduction in force. Just this week, Commissioner Macri canceled a meeting with the Maryland delegation. We were just simply asking about the impact of the administration's cuts to my state. I've been waiting, for example, for 7 weeks now for specific answers from the department, and we just need to know how many staff at FDA have received a RIF notice. We'd like to know how many participated in the deferred resignation program, were terminated on the basis of their probationary status, or are currently on administrative leave pending termination. I don't like the term reduction in force because it softens, I believe, the reality of what has happened. It is the very heartless and cruel firing of thousands of very critical civil servants without cause and without an ounce of thought about the potential consequences to public health and safety. So public health and safety is what brings us here today. I know that we're here to talk about reauthorizing the over-the-counter Monograph drug user fee program to keep Americans safe. And we also know that the administration has terminated 3,500 staffers from the FDA, including at the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, which undermines its ability to to really operate. So I want to just make very clear to the public, because these staffing cuts have really they've been framed as duplicative or administrative staff that have no bearing on public health. But the truth of the matter is that these staff members really contribute to the core functions of the FDA to keep humans safe. Each of them makes sure that, for example, pharmaceutical advertising is accurate, that the public is aware of potential risks, that drug shortages are mitigated, and that approvals are conducted in a timely manner. And so I understand that you're not able to answer specific questions about the so-called reduction in force, but instead I hope that you can demonstrate today the importance of the work that the civil servants do every day, and to talk generally about the implications of it. So just quickly, can you briefly share what the Center, for example, for Drug Evaluation and Research does every day?
Yes, thank you. So in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, we oversee several different programs, including obviously the AMUFA program and the OTC. So our Office of Non-Prescription Drugs, I can tell you, we've had very little loss in that office. That's the office that's primarily, we review new drugs that are coming through. We work with the sponsors. We have meetings on development programs. We review safety data in the post-marketing and make sure that the labels were up to date. We do review direct-to-consumer advertising and make sure promotion. As I said, we work on generic drugs. That's a big priority to get additional generic drugs in competition. In the biosimilar space, we're reviewing biosimilars, and we have a regulatory science program under that to develop the science to bring those drugs to the forefront sooner. And then we always communicate what we're doing. We have advisory committees when needed to bring further transparency and get additional expertise to inform our decisions.
So these are critical staff. The Center's Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. Can you just talk to us about what those staff members? I know you said there have been very few cuts, but cuts in any of these areas, I think, really do impact public health. So can you just tell us what the Center's Office of Pharmaceutical Quality does?
Yes, and I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that because they're really core to all our programs. They are responsible for looking at the manufacturing and the quality of the drug manufacturing. And so for example, under AMUFA 2, we're going to put more resources so that when a facility comes and starts to market an OTC monograph, that we quickly evaluate that facility, that we get those records requests out there, that we're going to update our risk model to make sure we're taking appropriate and selecting the facilities that we need to do a inspection on. And they do carry that out for our biosimilars and for generics and our new drugs as well. And they're also working to sort of be very forward-working. So when there is priority by the administration to try and bring our manufacturing back and for supply chain reasons. And we've been thinking about that and understand that companies would probably want to use advanced manufacturing to be more competitive. So several years ago, we started a special program to work with manufacturers. So when they want to use these new technologies, they can come talk to us early and we can give them advice and get them on the right path.
Thank you so much. So the work you do is critical. All of these staff are critical as well, just making the point that they're not wasteful. These are critical to our public health and safety. Thank you so much. I yield.
Senator Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, what improvements will the public see in the products on their drugstore shelves if Congress reauthorizes OMUFA for another 5 years?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the first thing I would mention, the order that we just did, which would allow certain drugs to be changed from just a tablet or a capsule into an oral dissolving or a chewable capsule or a film. And I think that will be a lot of innovation that will make these drugs more accessible to children and for those who have trouble swallowing. As I said, the more that we innovate with the industry by providing them further guidance, by meeting with them and making sure they have clarity on our expectations, we're going to do some webinars on the GRAS standard and talk to them about confidentiality guidance when they're doing a new ingredient. All those things we think are going to speed up innovation, and we hope to see additional OTC orders come out on new products.
On that point, the monographs and user fees are supposed to streamline the FDA's process to approve over-the-counter drugs. So better products come to market faster. But that only happens when the FDA uses that authority. How are you going to make better use of the OMUFA authority over the next 5 years to encourage that type of innovation?
Again, the commitments that we've agreed to is really to work make the meetings with our companies, make them as productive as possible, extend them if we need to, give them advice on their protocol synopsis so they get their products. We're also going to ask to create a new tier 2 so they can update their test methods, and that may be more efficient. We're going to continue to give them education on the GRACE standards, on how to submit their orders and what should be in there and their eligibility for that. And we're going to also make sure that we're being very transparent in all of this, including all the historical documents that will be up on the web so everyone can learn from those. They can learn from all the issues that we identify in the inequality, and we'll do some work on good manufacturing practices so that the expectations are clear. And when the expectations are clear, I think that allows for innovation.
On another point, I'm curious, why doesn't the FDA inspect more overseas facilities that export over-the-counter drugs to the U.S.?
So right now we do use a risk-based model to determine where our inspections, and we do inspections overseas and domestically, and we can get you those exact numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head. One of the things we will do is we're going to update our risk-based model and make sure it's taking into account any factors that may be specific to OTC monograph facilities, and that would determine inspections. We're also going to more rapidly do those record requests to assess the facilities that might need an inspection that are coming.
Do you think, are there loopholes there that allow for some overseas facilities not to be as inspected as much?
In terms of we can do the inspection, what's different in the OTC monograph space is in the other UFAs, there's a time point in which we can do the inspection before the product comes to the market, whereas in the OMUFA, there isn't that one time point. They can come into and register with us and start to distribute, and then we start the assessment of that facility.
Mr. Chairman, contaminated non-sterile eye drops coming from China and other countries have been a problem for years. I'd like to enter 3 different letters, FDA warning letters, to these companies into the record. Doctor, how do you determine whether these over-the-counter drugs actually follow the monographs and are safe, or whether they are fraudulent and dangerous?
Again, we look for reports with the eye drops. We did do, we had adverse events and we followed up on them. We issued the warning letters. We do inspections to see. So we do monitor the safety of the products on the market, and that's how we do that, a risk-based approach to that.
Okay, I'd like to dig into that more further at another time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Dr. Correa. I'm going to focus my 5 minutes on transparency, which has been mentioned by many of my colleagues, and you've mentioned it in your testimony. And I think it needs to be a hallmark of this particular program, and it also matches up with the values that Secretary Kennedy talked about when he's been here before us. And I've been troubled that while transparency is a goal, there's this one area where we just can't get answers. I asked Secretary Kennedy about the number of people who've been RIF'd or took the Fork in the Road initiative, and he could not answer at the time. He didn't have the number, at his fingertips. But when I did a follow-up letter, I still have not gotten a response. And that was kind of an interesting contrast to how customer-focused Secretary Kennedy was. In my questioning of him when he was recently before us, I raised the issue of his response to some of my constituents who were writing in about concerns, and they were getting response from HHS. It was actually a CMS response saying because of the change in administration, we can no longer entertain these kinds of questions. And when I showed that, Secretary Kennedy went back and he found that that was an improper response, and he told me that it was, and he said he was going to correct it, and this wasn't authorized. So he actually responded to my concern about that. And I think Senator Murray had a particular constituent concern that she raised, and he was very solicitous. We want to respond to that. So it seems like there's this sort of gag order on talking about the number of people that are employed or the number of people that are RIF'd. And for an oversight committee that's trying to exercise oversight over these programs, or even trying to decide what's the right way to reauthorize a program so that it can be effective, more effective, if we can't get an answer about kind of this basic issue, it hobbles us in our ability to do our job. And I know that policy decisions of this kind are probably not yours, but let me just ask if you could answer this question. Within the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, how many people were subject to the RIF issued by Secretary Kennedy?
Again, because it's under litigation, I'm not allowed to, or I can't discuss specifics, but we would be very happy when that litigation is resolved to come back and provide you those numbers.
And I'm assuming you would answer the same way if I asked you the question about how many of these folks who were RIF'd were veterans. You would answer the same way?
I would answer the same way.
So you and I both went to law school, and I've had to give a lot of advice to witnesses about not talking about pending litigation. And so I didn't ask you who was involved in the discussion, who was involved in the decision, what was the rationale for the decision, were there different rationales? I haven't asked you any of that. All I've asked you is the factual question, which is public. It should be public information because the public is paying for all of this, about the numbers of people. And the fact that I can't get that answer from you, from Secretary Kennedy, we asked similar questions of folks who've been here from the Department of Labor. Nobody wants to answer the question, how many people have been laid off and what percentage are veterans? Now, the veterans issue matters to me as a Virginian because we're such a veteran-heavy state. I have asserted, based on what I've been able to cobble together, that this administration has fired more veterans than any administration in the history of the United States. That's based on what I have been able to cobble together. I'd like to be proven wrong. Maybe if I got the answers to my questions, I'm making an assertion that's incorrect. But I think I'm entitled to the information. I know you've been instructed not to answer it. It's not that you can't, and it's not that you won't, it's that you've been instructed not to. But I will say, pending litigation is not really an excuse for not answering a basic factual question that the knowledge of which is within the ambit of the administration. On transparency, I do have some proposals about the reauthorization. You did a good job in your testimony of kind of laying out, if this program is not reauthorized, here are some bad things that can happen. Right. But also, I know the chairman is very much into this idea. If you're going to reauthorize, we don't just reauthorize as is. We should reauthorize and improve. There have been, obviously, longer-standing, more established user-fee programs where there's lessons learned about how we can improve. And I have been getting feedback from groups about how this particular OMUFA program can be improved. With the updates that I'm proposing that are in the transparency space, we would be able to have answers to questions like how many OTC monographs were filed and approved during a fiscal year, which drug facility and contract manufacturing organizations have actually paid their user fees instead of only having visibility into those who haven't paid their user fees. How is the FDA addressing post-market safety for OTC products? I think a lot of the questions today have kind of wrapped around that important topic, including how the agency responds to individual reports of adverse events. My hope is that we will do this bill. I think it is going to be bipartisan. I think we can not only reauthorize but improve by taking some of the lessons from the other similar programs, and pro-transparency initiatives are things that I think are going to get pretty nice support on both sides of the dais here. With that, I yield back.
And I have a couple follow-ups. How many RX to OTC drugs in the last 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, how many have actually made that transition from being a prescription only to being OTC?
Thank you for that question. I know that the naloxone would have been in 23, and I think the O-pill was also around that time. I'd have to go back further and get you the details on the rest of the drugs.
So Marshall asked about a dashboard, but that seems to be rubber hits the road. We've only had 3 drugs in the last 2.5 years that have gone from RX to OTC.
I believe that's correct. For some reason, I think I'm forgetting one, but I will get back to you.
That just seems like a not very productive record.
Again, I think the issue is we do need to find drugs. Drugs are safe, that are safe for a population, for anyone to walk in and look at that drug facts label and appropriately self-select and use that drug. And so we need to look at the drugs that we have and think if that is appropriate and look at the development programs. And I think that's why the new rule that we're coming out is really meant to try and open up that space more. Because for any drug, it may be relatively safe in this population, and it may be, but sometimes a drug fact label is not sufficient for just those folks to understand that that's a drug for them and it's not for others.
That's true of everything. Non-steroidals you shouldn't take if you have a history of active peptic ulcer disease.
Right.
And yet we've approved non-steroidals all over the place. And so we're willing to accept that somewhat of a risk. And so for the greater good, and turns out we've worked out. Not that many people are taking non-steroidals and exacerbating their peptic ulcer disease.
Right, that is true. We did.
And so I just want to lean into this because, I mean, this costs consumers a heck of a lot of money to go to a doctor to get a prescription for something which they could safely take OTC.
Yes, I agree. And, we are going to look for opportunities. And as I said, I think the new rule in which we can sort of it's adding something in the self-selection to the drug facts label has a real potential to open up for other conditions that could be for chronic conditions and open up consumer choice. And so we're going to work to finalize that rule and work on development programs that could come under that rule.
And I asked you this earlier, but I didn't quite follow the answer, so I'll finish with this.
Okay.
Do you feel as if this final rule, that you have the tools, particularly with this final rule, to expedite the transition from RX to OTC, or does Congress need to do something to kind of light a fire?
I think with this rule that we have a new tool that's going to be very powerful and effective for us to move things from RX to
And when do you expect the new rule to be implemented?
The rule was, the implementation was delayed. I think it should be the end of May, but I need to check. There was a delay after we had the transition.
Okay. Yes.
I have a follow-up just based upon the chairman's questions. To what degree was the fact that there have only been 3 or 4 RX to OTC in the relevant time period he was discussing? To what degree is that a function of just sheer personnel or resources within CDER versus, the regulatory structure that shapes what can be approved?
I would say in the last 5 years, it's more about the regulatory structure and what can be appropriately put over the counter and selected.
And so hopefully this new rule, when it becomes effective, will help you accelerate.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. For any senator wishing to ask additional questions, questions for the record will be due on 10 business days on June 18th at 5 p.m. Thank you very much, Dr. Corrigan Curry.
Thank you.
The committee stands adjourned.